Welcome to Vintage Helena, a series of profiles of individuals who have helped to make many good things happen over several decades in the capital city.
The best thing you can give a child is roots and wings. Sydney O'Malley Armstrong believes this to be true from her childhood of growing up in Montana's historic capital city. Helena has a tremendous sense of community where children and adults can spread their creative spirit in music, art, or the written word while enjoying its rich history. Giving all an opportunity to experience as a creator or audience at venues from the Helena Symphony to the Archie Bray to the Holter Museum of Art to visiting the Montana Historical Society. Helena has been coined the best little arts town in the West. Though it is small in size, it is enormous in character, and that gives its citizens roots and wings for all ages.
Most Montanans have a great sense of roots in our state and a great feeling of being Montanans. Though they're proud of being from Helena, or they grew up in Butte, or Missoula's their hometown, Billings is where they like to be, still there's a great sense of the state itself and a great love for the state. Then I think we have in Helena, and not only in Helena, but for me especially, since I was born and raised and have lived most of my life here, I think there's a tremendous sense of community. That we really want our community to be the very best, whether it be the schools, the parks, the nonprofits, the museums, the symphony, and so on. And I think some of that is because those early day miners and businessmen, many of them, who became millionaires, many of them poor immigrants who became millionaires, what they really wanted to do was emulate what did the very rich do on the East Coast? Well, they had theaters, and they had museums, and they had symphonies, and that's what you did. When you got some money, you might also buy some things, horses or whatever, but there was a great hunger for culture. And in the early days, as one reads about it, you know, they brought through the traveling road shows, I mean, of high quality opera, music, stage plays. You know, at the Montana Club, they say, and Theodore Roosevelt was here, and Mark Twain was here, and so on. So it wasn't sort of a dusty little forgotten, non-cultured town. In addition, many of those people, as they had children, they went east, or maybe to California. I remember that interview you did with Jean Bacchus.
I was gonna say.
She went to Stanford to school. My mother went to Trinity in Washington, D.C. Other people went other places. But again, it was not a bit unusual for people to go out of state for college. Then they usually came back and went a year or two at the University of Montana as well. So my mother's family in Helena, I always think is one part of Montana history. The immigrants who came, who got land of their own, established themselves as farmers or ranchers, and then their children went on to college and to different professions and so on. My father's family, on the other hand, were the industrial side of Montana. My grandfather, O'Malley, was born outside of St. Louis, Irish immigrant parents, ran away from home when he was 13, made his own way. They made him walk 5 miles a day to Mass. He didn't like it. Became a miner, mined in Leadville, Colorado, eventually made his way to Butte, where he became a labor organizer with Big Bill Haywood. And so my father, though not born in Butte, spent most of his growing up years in Butte. My grandfather later became a newspaper man with the Montana Standard. So there's that background as well. And this is a book my father wrote about growing up in Butte in the teens and the 20s, called Mile High, Mile Deep. In recent years, Russell Chatham found it, loved it, and asked if he couldn't republish it. He did a beautiful job, and of course this cover is a painting of his own of a Gallus frame. And then here is a picture of my father on the back of the book. That was when he and my stepmother retired, took early retirement and moved to Ireland, lived there for many years. So in any event, as I say, it's sort of representative of both sides of the family. This was an earlier paperback publication of Mile High, Mile Deep. But here in Helena, my grandfather, for whom I'm named, Dr. Sidney Cooney, He came from a ranch at Canyon Ferry, and his parents, Thomas and Mariah Cahill Cooney, had come in a covered wagon. They met and married as young Irish immigrants in Iowa. They got to Virginia City in June of 1865. They lived there for, I think, 2 or 3 years, and then they came to this part of Montana. And an interview with my grandmother, great-grandmother, many years later, she told the interviewer that Mr. Cooney took several nice nuggets out of New York Gulch. That's what we call York now. And so they established a ranch on the banks of the Missouri. Over time, as the dams came in, it kept taking more and more of the land. I do remember, as growing up before the dam in the 50s, we would go out and visit the ranch out at Canyon Ferry. And it was beautiful and it was wonderful. And my grandfather was the youngest of the 9 children who lived, of the Cooney family. And his brother, Fred Cooney, stayed and managed the ranch. The others did various things. His wife was the artist Fanny Corey Cooney. And we loved Aunt Fan. And she told wonderful stories. And as many people do know, she was both a children's book illustrator and a cartoonist. Nationally syndicated, Sunny Sayings was a panel in many, many national newspapers for many years, kind of like Dennis the Menace. And this was a Christmas card she designed for my mother when my mother was younger. And as you can see, it's Sunny Sayings with his little dog. And it says, "Got to memorize, twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you is," but I can't seem to remember what comes after is. And it says, "Lovingly, your Aunt Fan."
Very nice.
My grandfather, who was also a graduate of Helena High School, is pictured here in the Helena High School award-winning championship football team in 1898. He is the captain. He's sitting in front holding the football.
Sid says her childhood in Helena was marvelous, especially in the times that she grew up in.
And I think that's what we had in Helena. Again, that strong sense of community. You certainly felt safe anywhere you went. We rode our bikes or walked almost everywhere. And wings, there was a feeling that there wasn't anything you couldn't do or go or see. I grew up on the west side. Mount Helena was our backyard when we were old enough, and we didn't have to be very old. We packed a lunch, we went up on the mountain, and we came home when we heard the 6 o'clock bells ring from the cathedral, which was wonderful. Went to Hawthorne School, Helena High School, and then my last year in high school, I went to the International School of Geneva in Switzerland. My parents were divorced. My father was a foreign correspondent with the Associated Press, and he had remarried a wonderful woman whom he'd met in Europe, who was also American. And so I spent my senior year going to a school with 48 different nationalities, students, and that was a wonderful, wonderful and transformative year. Went to the University of Montana.
What did you study at the university?
Loved it. I studied French because I had so loved learning languages in Geneva, and had lived with 5 other girls in a pension with a Swiss family. The mother was a French literature teacher at the school, and so I became very interested in French. So I majored in French, minored in Spanish, was not interested in teaching, thought I might go back and work and live in Europe, but I fell in love and got married between my sophomore and junior year, and quickly had several children. So graduated with 1 baby and pregnant with another one. 3 boys, Joel, Chris, and Todd, and Vicky, who is the youngest, yes. But my children growing up in Helena, and they grew up just a couple of blocks of where I had lived on Monroe. Next door, in fact, to the Holters, and across the street from other Holters, Joan and Jeff. But in any event, my children grew up in that area and really had very much the same kind of childhood I did. Walked to school, Mount Helena was the backyard, and so forth and so on. So that was really fun.
Sid is a huge supporter of the arts. She serves on the Holter Museum of Art Board and has been involved in the Western Rendezvous of Art for several years.
Well, we know we aren't San Francisco or New York City or Paris or whatever. By the same token, we have some very fine things. And as a friend of mine always emphasizes, they're affordable and accessible. I think that's one of the big differences and something I appreciate
Very much so.
so much about our community, and that everyone can be involved in some way or another if they're interested. I have no particular talent in the arts. I have a great deal of interest, and I'm a very good audience. But I'm able to contribute through serving, for example, on the board of the Holter Art Museum. And that's particularly meaningful to me because I lived in the house where my mother also lived when she grew up. My father went first to war and then to, as a war correspondent, and then to Europe. And my parents were divorced and we moved into the house on Monroe that belonged to my grandfather, Dr. Sidney Cooney, Sid Cooney, for whom I'm named. But we lived next door to the Holters, to one part of the Holter family, the grandfather and a daughter and some grandchildren, and then Jeff Holder and his family lived across the street. Meanwhile, when he married Joan Holder, her father, Dr. Tracy, had been a great mentor to my grandfather as a young man and as he was studying to become a doctor. So there are all those wonderful connections in Helena and in Montana in general. What we become interested in often starts with our family. And certainly any opportunity with my family, though there was more emphasis on music and on books. My mother was a pianist, a classical pianist, a fine one. My father liked to play in jazz bands. My father was a newspaper reporter and writer. They had met and married in Missoula. They were both English lit majors. So that was an emphasis, but certainly the art as well. My family always loved the arts, although, you know, we just had prints on the wall and so on. I think it was visiting my aunt and uncle in Connecticut as a teenager, going to New York and going to the Museum of Modern Art. I absolutely knocked my socks off, and we had nothing like it in Helena at all. We had things, we had some nice Western paintings and so forth, but nothing that the Holter now can provide to our community and to school children, tourists, and so on. Our Holter Museum and the Archie Bray are two unique and wonderful gifts, I think, in terms of art in a small rural mountain town in Montana.
Aside from being a lover and supporter of the arts, Sid describes her life with the 3 Ps: politics, philanthropy, and parenthood. She has sat on organizations' boards like Humanities Montana, Montana Community Foundation, and the Governor's Task Force on Endowments and Philanthropy. She also works as a consultant for many of these organizations. She was an aide for the President and the Assistant Secretary of the Montana Senate for 2 legislative sessions, along with being a staffer for Governor Thomas Judge. She worked on the administration for Montana's former Governor Brian Schweitzer, serving as a member of his transition team in 2004. Another job title Sid holds is the Executive Director of the Greater Montana Foundation. Her first involvement in community work was when she joined her children's Hawthorne School PTA.
Then I was on the founding board for Head Start, and that was wonderfully exciting. When we first started, you know, that community action program with all the different parts of it, Head Start was a very important piece of it. Various things, but in terms of professionally, it was after the 1988 election when Governor Judge had tried for a 3rd term, did not make it, and someone with whom I'd worked in his administration had just come back to run a new statewide organization called the Montana Community Foundation. And a couple of days after we lost the election, he said to me, "There's this wonderful new organization. I need a 2nd person to come on board, and I think you will really like it." And he said this was not true. He said, "And you won't have to raise money for it." He was mistaken.
Right.
In any event, that was a wonderful part of my life. Ray, I was there for a couple of years, went on to head up the MSU Foundation, and I became executive director. Through that statewide nonprofit, I got to know people, I think, in every corner of the state and admire and like and appreciate what different people were doing in their communities, especially when we were selected to work with the Ford Foundation as one of 4 statewide foundations in the country to see if community foundations could make a difference in people's economic life in rural communities. And the places they picked, we were the newest, youngest, smallest staff. They probably had no business picking us, but we were glad. Eventually, I had been doing volunteer work in Democratic politics. One reason was that one of my friends from high school, Tom Judge, he was a couple of years ahead of me, asked me when he returned after college and working if I would work on a legislative campaign. Started then, continued throughout the rest of his campaigns, and eventually then went to work in Governor Judge's office for 8 years. And that was the first time I'd really gone to work full-time, and it was a very exciting, challenging, and rewarding time. Until I was older and worked later for the AFL-CIO, Montana State AFL-CIO, and got very interested in the history of the trade union movement in general, and especially in Montana. And I knew my grandfather O'Malley had been involved, but didn't know much about it. And so then started asking my father, and he started writing letters and telling me more about it. I'd not really known much about it. I can remember dinner conversations. My mother, my sister, and I moved in with my grandfather. I think I was in 4th grade after my grandmother had died. And there was conversation at the dinner table. And my grandfather's family had been very involved in Democratic politics. His older brother had been in the legislature. In fact, he tossed the money back over the transom when they were trying to bribe them about the state capitol. But I don't know really where it all came from. Just a general interest in world affairs, Montana affairs, and so on. And then I'd known Max Baucus, not well because he was behind me in school, but I was very interested in his campaign. Worked on his, as a volunteer, worked on his '74 campaign and continued to support him along with Pat Williams. You know, there aren't that many of us. We all know, we kind of know and like each other. And I was very thrilled when Brian Schweitzer was elected. Some of my old friends were working for him. I worked as a volunteer on the campaign and then worked on the staff as part of the transition team. Rewarding, challenging, frustrating, stressful, all those kinds of things. The Judge administration, I think, was especially rewarding inasmuch as we were implementing a new constitution, which many people still think is the finest constitution of any state in the nation. That was a wonderful time. There was also a lot of money, both federal programs and the big energy boom. So there was money to do many good things for people, for education, for people who were struggling without jobs, for children who were disabled. The institutions, when Governor Judge took office, were in a terrible mess. We worked very hard on that. The legislature eventually began deinstitutionalization. Carol Judge, that was one of her initiatives. She was a nurse. She had actually done practice nursing at Warm Springs. We visited all the institutions. Carol was so instrumental in the community-based organizations and housing and so on. People didn't want these people from Boulder coming and living in a house next door to them. But when the First Lady came for a tea to open that house, it brought people from around that town or city in to see it and realized that it really was the right thing to do. Time went on, times got tough. I think Governor Schweitzer came along at a time when a fresh, new, innovative entrepreneurial spirit was really needed in our state, and I think he has done a tremendous job, absolutely phenomenal. Among other things, bringing Montana and the way we live and work to the attention of the rest of the nation. But I am an optimist, and I do think that our lives are going to continue to get better. I do too. As long as we keep working at it, though, and again, build that community engagement, activity, diversity, welcoming people of other interests, religions, homelands, and so forth.
Sid Armstrong has most definitely filled her life with the 3 Ps: politics, philanthropy, and parenthood. Growing up in Helena with the history and art, she has had plenty of inspiration. Now, after all her efforts and participation in this community, she now inspires others to support and to get involved.
Thank you for watching Vintage Helena. We hope you enjoyed this segment. If you'd like to suggest someone to be profiled by Vintage Helena, please contact us at HCTV. You can also contact us at Helena Civic Television if you'd like to make a donation to the Vintage Helena program.